Welcome, everyone, to another Upper Peninsula Environmental Coalition live stream. We like to start out all our streams with an acknowledgement of the Anishinaabe and our written statement. Upper Peninsula Coalition, and as the longest serving environmental coalition in Michigan's youth, the Upper Peninsula Environmental Coalition strives to preserve and enhance unique cultural and natural resources of the Upper Peninsula through a public education, the promotion of sound land steward, science-based decision policy, and with communities, governments, industries, and others with whom we share this land. The Upper Peninsula Environmental Coalition recognizes the tribal nations of this territory, acknowledge that we stand upon the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe. In doing so, we seek to heal traumas inflicted by an ongoing history of colonization and correct intergenerational justice. And we appreciate all the diversity of the tribes in Michigan. If you thought a bit about all of them, we appreciate and love all of you. Thank you. And tonight, we have a presentation. So happy to have a couple of guests here. Megan Tinsley, Policy Director of the Environmental Council. And we also have Phillips, Michigan Stewards, and Costa County Drain Commissioner. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to run the slides here. And of course, would you like to do some introductions about our guests?
I think you did fine. They will give us a little background, I think, each one. So so that gives us an opportunity to hear the words from them themselves, actually.
All right. We're going to talk about what's going on with septic legislation tonight.
Okay. Are you ready for us to take off here?
You can take it away. Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's nice to be here. And yes, we're going to explain what's happening in the world of septic legislation and a little bit about the scope of the problem and why this is an ongoing fight. It's been going on for quite a while, and hopefully this year we'll actually get it all done. So why don't we move ahead to the next slide? And I apologize that the most important part of Michigan does not appear on this map. But it was from a Michigan State University study, and all us trolls down here have a hard time remembering there's a Upper Peninsula part. The map on the left of this picture shows the relative density of septic systems in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. And as you can see, the more populated areas have a greater density. Michigan, as defined by water as we are, it's hard to believe that we are the only state in the nation that does not have a statewide septic code to deal with how to maintain and manage septic systems once they're installed. We estimate that there's somewhere close to 1.5 million on-site septic systems in the state, and that better than a third of our residents rely on septic systems. And it's important to remember that most people that are using septic systems are also using private wells for drinking water. These two issues really relate to one another. It's estimated that each septic system generates 300 to 400 gallons of sewage every day, which means throughout the state of Michigan, we're generating more than 455 million gallons of septic wastewater every day. It's a pretty significant number when you start adding it all together. In pretty much all communities, with few exceptions in Michigan, once a septic system is installed, there is nothing requiring ongoing maintenance or inspection or anything to make sure that those systems are functioning properly. A comprehensive study by Michigan State University suggests that at least a third of the septic systems in Michigan are not working properly, and that's a very significant problem. Next slide, please. And I referred to an MSU study. This is probably the most significant piece of data that we have informing this debate. In 2015, MSU, led by a professor who's we're fortunate to have in the state, Joan Rose, who is one of the preeminent experts in this field. They did a study of 64 rivers in the Lower Peninsula. And the results from their study were really depressing. They indicated that and they could differentiate human and non-human sourced, fecal contamination was affecting 100% every single water body that they studied. Um, Bacterial concentrations were highest, of course, where the number of septic systems, I get tired of saying that, in the watershed area were highest. And what you see in the inset are two maps showing the relative levels of fecal coliform on the left, and the right-hand one is of the what's called B theta. It's a marker that lets them differentiate human from non-human E. coli. So you can see some pretty significant colors there throughout much of the watersheds in the state. Next one, please. Next slide.
There we go.
There you go. Another study, a smaller one, was performed by Streamside Ecological Services, a environmental consulting company. They did over 150 samples in 7 mid-Michigan waterways under various conditions, wet weather, dry weather, trying to sort of ensure that we weren't just seeing like runoff effects. Every single one of the 7 waterways they tested at some point exceeded water quality standards for E. coli contamination, and they likewise were doing the analysis that lets them differentiate human from non-human sourced. All of these waterways contained human-sourced E. coli. So as you could tell, these studies, and there have been some others, suggest that septic systems are causing a problem in Michigan waterways. So let's move on. We can talk a little bit about what that problem looks like. And of course, the issue is, what is septic system failure? Well, that picture is pretty obvious. What we would think of is failure, septic sewage on the ground or backing up into your house. But failure is really a broader set of conditions where untreated or improperly treated sewage is getting through a system, maybe going into the groundwater, leaking into local sewer systems, or maybe endangering a public or your private water supply well. So any place where these kind of different problems may be occurring, you have a septic tank with a leak in it, for instance, those cement tanks crack sometimes, especially in our freeze-thaw weather. Those would be considered failures, but failures that we probably don't know about. And officials who have worked in this believe that reported failures, the kind that you see in the picture, are only just a fraction of the total number of systems that are causing problems and that may be undetected for years before we find out about them. Next one, please. So what does it all mean to us? Obviously, when septic contamination reaches our waterways, it has serious impacts on our surface waters. It has the potential to contaminate our groundwater, which is often the route to our surface water, and our drinking water supplies. Almost half the residents in Michigan get their drinking water from wells. We've certainly seen a lot of evidence in recent years about the increasing growth of algae blooms in our lakes and streams. Some of that comes from agricultural runoff practices, but we also believe that our septic problem inputs are adding to that loading that creates that problem. And the other problem, of course, with this material ending up in our waterways is there the possibility for significant human pathogens in those waters that people can be in contact with that can cause serious disease issues, particularly among the more vulnerable, older people, people with immune systems, children. So this is a problem that's been going on for a long time in Michigan. And we haven't had much success yet in trying to address it, but that's what we're working on. So let's go ahead. And so Megan's going to tell you how we're going to fix this problem, right, Megan?
Right. I have all the answers. No, thank you, Seth. That was a good overview of sort of the situation that we find ourselves in. And I always find it slightly ironic that the logo for Michigan is pure Michigan. And yet, as Seth mentioned, we are the only state that lacks a statewide approach to what a septic code should be. So there are two pieces of legislation that deal with this issue that have been introduced actually around Earth Day last year. So they've been in the legislative system for over a year now. And we're just going to talk a little bit about what those bills do and then work toward, letting you know all of the sort of challenges and opposition that we've been hearing to the bills. And as of now, they have yet to receive a hearing in the House or the Senate. So that's kind of where we are, and we'll work through this a little bit. So House Bill 4479 is the House version, and Senate Bill 299 is the Senate version of the same bill. And this basically creates a duty for local health departments to inspect and evaluate septic systems. It does establish the authority for the creation of inspection fees for local health departments to be able to administer to finance the program. And it also establishes a state administrative fee of $25, which would go to help the state build a database to be able to track where all of the septic systems in the state are. Because currently we have a big hole as it relates to that information. Many systems have never been inspected before, installed before counties and health departments were even tracking where the systems were. So that fee would help to bring sort of the information up to date. And it would define the scope of an on-site wastewater system, including alternative systems. So those that don't, qualify. In some places, you can't do septic systems exactly the same. And it would also define failure, which is really important because different places can have different definitions of what failure really means. And this would create a definition that was consistent across the state. And a couple more things, it would lay out requirements for construction permits and alternative systems. And I think the most significant thing that we want to stress here is that the legislation would require periodic inspections. So currently, unless you live in one of about 11 counties across the state that has what we call a time or a point of sale septic inspection trigger. So that's where a property goes up for sale, and those particular counties do have a requirement that along with the other home inspections, the septic systems are inspected as well. But if you live outside of one of those 11 counties, a few municipalities have those requirements as well. But by and large, most of the state is uncovered by any requirements for septic system inspection. Like Seth mentioned, this legislation would require that every system in the state at some point in time, regardless of whether a property is being listed for sale, anyone owning a home with a septic system would have to have some sort of inspection. And then as noted at the bottom, the frequency or how often that would it be 5 or 7 or 10 years? Those are the sort of things that are still under discussion. I think we're working on reviewing, Seth, the 4th version of the bills currently, and we're expecting another iteration as the bill sponsors have met with different stakeholder groups. So that is still under discussion, what that will look like. But what we really want to see is at least, the legislation move us toward, as a state, those, septic systems out in the landscape being inspected at least some amount of, time that makes sense. The EPA recommends systems be inspected every 3 to 5 years. I think that's ambitious considering not that doesn't need to be done. Let me rephrase that. I'm not sure that we can get the Michigan legislation to be that frequent because the state has ignored this problem for so long. And we have such a backlog of systems that have never been inspected. But in any case, we're still working in stakeholder groups to flesh those things out. And then working on thinking about how we could prioritize different properties and we'll get into this a little bit, but we're hearing a lot of opposition to the bills, particularly from health departments. because their viewpoint is they just don't have the funding or the staff capacity to be able to do periodic inspections at the level the legislation currently calls for. So we're also discussing how could we, sort of make a ramp up to where we get to inspecting all systems eventually in the state. But while we're working on getting to that point, can we look at prioritizing certain properties, such as perhaps those that have never had any sort of permit, likely failing, and then those also within, a certain distance of a water body that would be more problematic for water contamination. So those are the things that we're discussing with the legislation right now. And I wanted to stress here, because this is something as I'm hoping you all will engage and help us in this. But we're hearing, the message loud and clear from places like counties that have the time of sale sort of ordinances. They really like them. They really feel like they're working. But that isn't something that we want to sort of take the place of what would be periodic inspection across the state. And these are the sort of things that I want you to all take away, because, if you have conversations with your local government officials or the health department and they say, well, we just can't do this periodic approach, maybe we could do time of sale. But I want to just, share this information, which is Michigan is 11th in the nation for the percent of homeowners living in their homes for long periods of time. So 38% of Michigan's homeowners are living in their home for 24 years or more. So that's significant because the average septic system is designed to last approximately 20 years. So relying on when a property comes for sale to trigger a septic inspection is problematic from an environmental and human health standpoint, because you may have homeowners living in their homes, longer than a septic system should last, and therefore needing to have inspections prior to when that home is ever actually sold. And this just shows, things have changing. This is a nationwide trend, but people are staying in their homes, certainly post-COVID. Aging populations seem to be sort of staying in place, and people are definitely staying in their homes longer than they used to. So relying on the time of sale, again, as the statewide approach to septic systems isn't what we would say would be preferable. And the second piece of legislation, so there were two bills that I mentioned there. This would establish, so there's one that sort of lays out the definition of failure, develops a sort of periodic sort of inspection. We're not sure what the number of years would be like, but there's also a bill that establishes a technical advisory committee in Eagle. And this would be a committee, of appointed individuals that have, some would represent the septic system industry, a representative of the environment, a public health component. So people to sort of balance perspectives to take a look at some of these things that we don't want to necessarily put into the legislation. So specific things that needed to be debated and considered. This particular legislation, which is 4480 and the Senate Bill 300, would establish this committee. And that's also what the legislation does. And you can go to the next one. And the thing that I really want to note here is that upon this establishment of the committee, Eagle would adopt administrative rules that would establish the statewide code containing performance-based standards for conventional and alternative on-site wastewater treatment systems. But the mandatory inspection program would not go into effect until Eagle promulgates these rules. So this will take, I would say, this says not later than 3 years, but I would expect it to take probably the full 3 years for this body to start meeting and laying out all of these things and standards. And I think the key thing here is because we've heard a lot of opposition to this legislation, is that this will provide a sort of time for health departments to increase their staff, for, legislators to work on getting funding mechanisms in place to provide the capacity needed to manage and administer this program. So that's just, important to remember because a lot of the health departments are in a panic saying they can't possibly do this. But there is this, time that we have once this technical advisory committee starts meeting before the periodic inspection program would ever kick off in the state. And so, I've mentioned a little bit that the sort of tough part to this, I mean, the financial resources is definitely the biggest obstacle that we've seen. So there is currently a lot of health department opposition, feeling like they don't have the capacity to implement this. And even though the bill does provide the health departments the ability to assess a fee, they don't feel, at least some that I've spoken to, that fee will be sufficient, or they couldn't charge residents as much as what would be required to actually administer this program. So, that's where it's tough to go from not having any septic code regulation or inspection program to all of a sudden, trying to get every home in the state with a septic system inspected on some sort of periodic interval. So certainly, this financial piece is a very big piece. I will mention that in 2022, there was a $30 million loan fund included in a big bill that passed that was really centered around water infrastructure and things. That loan program is up and running. But we also want to be very cognizant that not every resident can apply for and qualify for a loan to repair their septic systems. So we're certainly seeking some sort of grant program as well to help homeowners, that need that special assistance. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the sources of opposition that we've seen. But as far as the status of the bills right now, we have the House and Senate companions. Rep. Skaggs is the lead sponsor on the bill that requires the inspections in the House, with Rep. Carrie Reingens sponsoring the Technical Advisory Committee bill, and then Senator Singh is the sponsor of both of those bills in the Senate. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, we haven't had a committee hearing yet. We were hopeful that would happen this summer, but the legislature is still working on the budget. And now we've heard recently that likely there will not be a committee hearing on the bills until the fall. So this is, unfortunate, but we're still hopeful that we will get these bills up for a hearing. And some of the sort of other things that we've heard of that we haven't mentioned yet. Certainly local health departments are concerned about financing, and being able to afford to run the program. But also the workload and sort of the inability to fill the positions that they have currently, and declining workforce in areas like water and inspection. And we've heard that being a concern, that the health departments may not even have the ability to fill the number of positions that they would need to do inspections that frequently. Again, the frequency of inspections and what that will look like in the final legislation is, still under consideration. There's also been discussion of sort of, where do we dispose of the septic waste once we start pumping more systems? And, some wastewater treatment facilities accept septic waste, some don't. And, some that do, I've heard are, kind of close to capacity for what they can accept currently. So those are things that we're discussing. And then there's still, members of the legislature that I've spoken to do mention the sort of property rights issue, where they, a lot of constituents in their area voice opposition to having people come on to their property, do that sort of inspection. That's another reason why some would favor time or point of sale, because you already have sort of other inspections going on in a home. So there are those arguments that we encounter as well. And then I just wanted to mention this list probably is not entirely complete, but these are the Michigan counties that we know have passed resolutions opposing this current legislation.